A farmer, using his tractor to rescue a woman from deadly floodwaters, found his entire farm shut down by safety officials the very next day. He believed his act of heroism had cost him everything. Welcome, everyone, to Moments Revealed. Let's get started. Tom Bradley, at 52, tapped his weather app for the third time that morning. The radar screen glowed an angry red, a solid wall of storm moving relentlessly across central Iowa, flash flood warnings already blaring across the region. He'd weathered enough storms in his lifetime to know this one spelled disaster. His corn, weeks from harvest, stood heavy-eared and golden, the fruit of months of painstaking labor. A single violent storm could obliterate it all. This farm wasn't just land. It was his family's legacy, handed down through 4 generations, yet maintaining it felt like an increasingly Sisyphean struggle. 3 years prior, cancer had claimed his wife, Linda, leaving him adrift with 400 acres, and a debt that seemed to swell rather than shrink. Their daughter, Casey, now lived in the distant hum of Chicago, her weekly calls a stark contrast to her rare visits. She'd made it painfully clear the farm held nothing but haunting memories for her. The first heavy drops splattered against his windshield as Tom steered his tractor towards the barn. What began as a light drizzle was rapidly morphing into something far more menacing. The sky had shifted, darkening to that ominous, bruised, green-black hue that every Midwest farmer instantly recognized as a harbinger of true trouble. By noon, the rain wasn't just falling, it was descending in solid sheets. Tom stood in his kitchen, transfixed as water cascaded from his roof. Outside, the drainage ditches lining County Road 47 were already swollen, a torrent of debris churning past his driveway. Then, a sound cut through the deluge. A car horn, desperate and prolonged. A piercing cry against the storm's roar. It blared again, more frantic this time. Tom snatched his rain jacket and bolted outside. What met his eyes made his blood run cold. A sedan sat nose deep in the churning, flooded ditch, water raging around it with terrifying force. The current was mercilessly shoving it sideways, pushing it relentlessly towards the culvert beneath the road. Once it reached that narrow choke point, the vehicle would be utterly submerged. Someone was trapped inside, their hand frantically pounding against the window. Tom sprinted towards his barn. His trusty John Deere, the heaviest piece of equipment he owned, possessed enough brute power to yank the car free, if he could only secure the chains fast enough. The tractor roared to life on the very first try. Rain hammered against his face as he drove, navigating towards the floodwaters, angling for the best possible approach. The water surged, a brown, churning torrent carrying branches and refuse. As he drew closer, Tom could clearly make out the driver, a woman, likely in her early 30s, frantically struggling to roll down her window. Water was already seeping into the cabin. Pure panic etched her features. He estimated maybe 5 minutes before the car would be completely swallowed by the flood. Tom seized his heavy chains and plunged into the rushing water. The current slammed into him like a physical blow, threatening to sweep him off his feet as he battled his way towards the submerged vehicle. His boots slid precariously on the muddy bottom. "I'm getting you out!" he bellowed over the deafening roar of the storm and flood. Working by sheer feel in the murky, tumultuous water, Tom managed to loop one end of the chain securely around the car's front axle. The other end he attached to his tractor's hitch. Back aboard the mighty John Deere, Tom gently eased the machine forward, taking up the slack. Too much throttle would snap the chain. Too little, and the current would win. The tractor's massive tires clawed at the mud, the diesel engine groaning, straining against the relentless flood. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden lurch, the car broke free, sliding backward through the treacherous water to the relative safety of higher ground. Tom killed the engine and scrambled off the tractor, rushing to the car. The woman stumbled out, shaking violently and drenched to the bone. Even through the thelti, pekeltan inding. Ratotitefeindenibuan, he could see tears streaming down her face. "Are you hurt?" Tom yelled over the diminishing roar of the storm. She shook her head, seemingly unable to speak. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, wearing what had once been nice clothes. Now, ruined by the flood. Something about her face tugged at Tom's memory, but he couldn't quite place it. "We need to get you inside," he urged. "You're hypothermic." In his warm kitchen, Tom handed her a thick towel and began brewing coffee. She was shivering uncontrollably, her lips a pale blue from the cold water. "I'm Rachel," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "Rachel Whitmore." The name didn't ring any bells, yet her face continued to nag at him. "Tom Bradley," he replied. "What were you doing out in this storm?" Rachel pulled the towel tighter around her shoulders. "Driving from Des Moines to see someone I should have visited years ago." Her gaze swept around the worn but comforting kitchen. "I grew up around here, actually. On a farm, just like this." That explained the nagging familiarity. So many farm kids had left over the years. "The roads will be washed out for hours," Tom informed her. "You're welcome to wait until it's safe." Rachel nodded, still shivering. "I need to call my office. Let them know I'm okay. My phone got soaked." Tom handed her his landline, then went upstairs to find some dry clothes. Linda's things were still in the closet. His wife, he knew, would have wanted them used to help someone in need. By the time Rachel had changed, the worst of the storm had passed. The rain had lightened to a gentle drizzle, and patches of fragile blue were beginning to break through the heavy clouds. "Your car should start once it dries out," Tom said, assessing the vehicle. "Might need a tow, but you were lucky. A few more minutes." He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air between them. They both knew. Rachel stared out towards the still flooded fields. "You saved my life. Most people would have just called 911 and hoped for the best." Tom shrugged, a hint of discomfort in his posture. "Couldn't watch someone drown in my front yard." "Not everyone would have risked their own safety like that," Rachel insisted. "Your tractor could have gotten stuck. You could have been swept away." The distant rumble of an engine interrupted them. Tom looked out to see a tow truck and a rental car pulling into his driveway. "That's my team," Rachel explained. "I called while you were checking my car." Team. Tom wondered what kind of work required a team, but he held his tongue. Rachel gathered her still damp clothes and turned to Tom, an expression he found difficult to decipher on her face. Gratitude, certainly, but something else, too. Something akin to deep determination. "Mr. Bradley," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "what you did today means more than you realize. I won't forget this." After Rachel departed, Tom spent the remainder of the day grappling with the storm's aftermath. Trees lay felled. His shed had lost sections of its roofing. The lower fields would require time to drain and dry. The flooded ditch had receded, leaving behind a messy trail of debris and thick mud. By evening, The entire harrowing ordeal almost seemed like a dream. Tom heated soup for dinner, attempting to focus on his plans for tomorrow. Immediate problems. The storm damage would undoubtedly cost money he didn't have. Insurance might cover some, but it wouldn't compensate for the lost time, nor the gnawing stress of wondering if this latest disaster would finally be the one to break him. He was just settling in to watch the evening news when he heard vehicles outside. Tom peered out to see 3 official-looking trucks, their government plates glinting, headlights cutting sharp lines through the encroaching dusk. Men in uniforms emerged from the vehicles, armed with clipboards and equipment. The lead truck bore the unmistakable emblem of the Iowa Department of Agriculture, complete with a safety inspection seal. Tom's stomach plummeted. Agricultural safety inspectors were the absolute last thing any farmer wanted to see. They possessed the authority to shut down operations for even the most minor violations, and his equipment, he knew, wasn't exactly up to current safety standards. The knock on his door was firm and authoritative. "Mr. Bradley, Inspector Davies, State Agriculture Department," a voice announced. "We need to discuss serious safety violations that occurred on your property yesterday." Safety violations? Tom's mind raced. Had someone reported him for using his tractor in such dangerous conditions? "What violations?" he managed to ask, despite a growing sense of dread. Davies consulted his clipboard, his expression stern and unyielding. "Operating farm equipment in extreme weather without proper safety protocols. Unauthorized use of agricultural machinery for non-farming purposes. Failure to secure equipment during severe weather warnings." Each accusation landed like a punch to Tom's gut. They were describing his life-saving rescue as criminal negligence. "Sir, there was a woman drowning. I couldn't just—" "Mr. Bradley, regulations exist for reasons," Davies interrupted, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your actions yesterday put yourself and others at unnecessary risk. We have no choice but to issue an immediate cease and desist order for all farming operations." The world seemed to spin around Tom. "You're shutting down my farm?" "Effective immediately, you're prohibited from operating any farm equipment until a full safety review is completed. This includes tractors, combines, any motorized agricultural machinery." "How long?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. Davies exchanged a quick glance with his colleagues. "Minimum 30 days. Could be longer depending on what we find." 30 days. His entire harvest would be ruined. The mortgage payment due next month would go unpaid. Everything he had worked for, everything his family had built, would be lost. All because he had tried to save someone's life. "This is insane," Tom exclaimed, struggling to control the tremor in his voice. "I saved a woman from drowning and you're punishing me for it?" "Emotions don't change regulations," Davies replied, unmoved. "You'll receive formal documentation in the morning. Until then, this property is under agricultural safety lockdown." The inspectors left as abruptly as they had arrived. Tom stood rooted in his doorway, watching their taillights recede into the deepening twilight, desperately trying to process the surreal events that had just unfolded. He slumped into his kitchen chair and stared blankly at the phone. Should he call Casey? But what could he possibly say? That her childhood home was being lost because he had helped a stranger? That night, sleep remained an elusive dream for Tom. He paced through his house, his gaze falling upon 4 generations of family photographs, a chilling question echoing in his mind. Would he be the one to lose it all? Outside, his fields stretched towards the horizon, a silent testament to his life's work, now under a grim official ban. Horizon. The corn, heavy and ripe, awaited a harvest he would now never be allowed to bring in. But Tom, lost in the immediate despair, had no inkling that what felt like his worst nightmare was, in fact, the prelude to something truly extraordinary. The next morning offered no reprieve. The agricultural inspectors returned, their vehicles now accompanied by larger equipment trucks and their hands full of official documents. Tom's farm was, unequivocally, under complete lockdown. "You need to stay off all agricultural areas during our inspection," Inspector Davies explained, handing Tom a thick folder filled with papers. "Any interference will result in additional penalties." Tom watched from his porch, a helpless observer, as strangers swarmed his property, meticulously measuring and photographing every detail. They erected stark barriers around his equipment shed, marking off areas of his own land that he was now forbidden to enter. His home, his sanctuary, had been transformed into a cold, official crime scene. By noon, word of the shutdown had spread like wildfire through the tight-knit farming community. Neighbors drove by slowly, their faces etched with concern, some pulling over to ask what was happening. Tom found himself explaining over and over again that he was under investigation, that his farm had been shut down indefinitely. "This is about pulling that car out, isn't it?" asked Henry Walsh from the adjacent farm, his voice laced with indignation. "Heard someone called it in as reckless endangerment." Reckless endangerment? The words tasted bitter and unjust in Tom's mouth. The afternoon brought more crushing news. His insurance agent called, informing him that his claims were being reviewed extensively. Then the bank called, a stark reminder of his mortgage payment due in just 3 weeks. Tom sat amidst a growing pile of official documents he barely understood, the legalese blurring into a meaningless jumble. Outside, the inspectors continued their relentless work, their vehicles parked around his barn like an occupying army. Then, his phone rang. Casey's number. "Dad, what's going on?" Her voice, sharp with worry, cut through his haze. "Someone said your farm was shut down by the state." Tom closed his eyes. "I helped someone during the storm," he began, his voice weary. "Pulled a car out of a flooded ditch. Now they're saying I violated safety regulations." "They shut down the entire farm because you helped someone?" Casey asked, disbelief heavy in her tone. 30 days minimum, Tom confirmed. "Could be longer." Casey was quiet for a long moment. "Dad, I can try to help with the mortgage, but I don't have much saved." "No, this isn't your problem," Tom insisted, though even as he spoke the words, he knew there might not be any solution at all. The farm that had endured the Great Depression, weathered countless droughts, floods, and recessions, was now on the precipice of being lost. Not to nature's wrath or crushing debt, but because he had chosen to save a stranger. That night, Tom walked his fields one last time, a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, silently bidding farewell to the land that had defined his family for generations. The tall corn rustled softly in the evening breeze, ready for a harvest that would now never come. He paused at the old sycamore tree near the irrigation ditch, where he and Linda had carved their initials decades ago. The bark had grown over the letters, but Tom knew exactly where to find them by feel. He ran his fingers along the weathered mark. "I'm sorry, Linda," he whispered into the night. "I tried to hold on." 4 generations of Bradleys had tilled this soil, survived droughts and floods and recessions, and now he was about to lose it all. Not to the elements, or even to insurmountable debt, but to paperwork, to regulations drafted by people who had never known the desperate struggle of pulling a car from a raging flood. In the distance, he could see the lights from the inspection team's camp, a constant, glowing reminder of how quickly his world had been turned upside down. Everything had changed. Yesterday, he'd been a farmer. Today, he was a man under investigation, barred from his own land. The third day brought new arrivals. Tom watched from his kitchen window as even more official vehicles pulled in, this time followed by massive moving trucks and heavy construction equipment. Inspector Davies knocked again, but this time his expression was subtly different. Less stern, perhaps a touch apologetic. "Mr. Bradley, everything we've done has been necessary," Davies stated, though his tone seemed to contradict the formal words. "However, there have been new developments in your case." "New developments?" Tom stepped outside, trying to make sense of the burgeoning circus on his property. Men in work clothes were busily unloading equipment, while others began setting up some kind of staging area near his barn. "What's all this for?" Tom asked, gesturing wildly. "It's part of the safety review process," Davies replied, deliberately avoiding Tom's gaze. "You need to stay clear of all operational areas while the team completes their work." Operational areas. His farm had been transformed into operational areas in some incomprehensible process he didn't understand. That afternoon, a sleek black sedan arrived. A woman in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a briefcase and exuding an aura of pure government authority. Tom's heart sank further. "Mr. Bradley, Patricia Morgan, State Agricultural Development Office. I need to inform you of additional requirements regarding your safety review." Additional requirements. Tom was almost numb to bad news at this point. "Now, you're being temporarily relocated during the intensive phase of our investigation. All expenses paid, of course, for your safety, while heavy equipment operates on the property." "Relocated?" Tom echoed, incredulous. "How long?" 30 days minimum. You'll stay at a resort facility while we complete our work." A resort facility. Tom almost let out a cynical laugh. He was being evicted from his farm, his home, and sent to some government-funded hotel while bureaucrats systematically dismantled everything he held dear. "Do I have a choice?" he asked, his voice strained. Patricia's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Regulations require us to maintain a safe perimeter during safety reviews. The work involves heavy machinery and hazardous materials assessment." Hazardous materials! Tom glanced around his corn farm, utterly baffled, wondering what hazardous materials they could possibly unearth. Within hours, Tom found himself a passenger in a government vehicle, watching his farm shrink and finally disappear in the rearview mirror. His destination was an agricultural conference center, a 3-hour drive away. The facility was surprisingly nice, more akin to a retreat center than institutional housing. His room overlooked a serene lake, boasting comfortable furniture and amenities that seemed excessive for someone under investigation. All meals are included, explained Janet, the facility manager, with a cheerful smile. There are hiking trails, a fitness center, even a golf course. Think of it as a working vacation. Working vacation. Tom was too weary to fight anymore. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of forced relaxation and mounting dread. He called his farm every morning, but no one would give him any specific information. Davies always delivered the same unhelpful refrain. The review is proceeding according to schedule. On the 10th day, Tom was sitting by the lake when Janet approached with a phone. "Call for you, Mr. Bradley, Agricultural Development Office." Tom took the phone with a heavy sigh of resignation. More requirements, more delays, he thought. "Mr. Bradley, Patricia Morgan," the voice on the other end began. "I have news about your situation." Here it comes, Tom thought. The final blow. "The safety review of your property has been completed ahead of schedule. We're ready for your return." Tom felt a faint, unfamiliar flicker of hope. "The lockdown is lifted?" he asked, barely daring to believe. "You can come home, Mr. Bradley. We're sending transportation this afternoon." Home. Tom had almost stopped believing he would ever see his farm again. The ride back was surreal. Tom sat, watching the familiar countryside pass by, his mind racing with possibilities of what he might find. Torn-up fields, damaged buildings, equipment scattered and broken. As they turned down his driveway, Tom braced himself for the worst. Instead, what he saw made him question his sanity. His farm looked better than it had in years. The equipment shed had been completely rebuilt, boasting new siding and a metal roof that gleamed brilliantly in the afternoon sun. His tractor sat in the yard, but it looked different, cleaner, newer somehow. Tom got out slowly, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. His fields, which should have been trampled by heavy machinery, were perfectly maintained. His corn, impossibly, had been harvested, neat rows stretching to the horizon, clearly indicating professional work. "What happened here?" Tom muttered, bewildered. That's when he saw her. Rachel Whitmore was standing on his front porch, dressed in jeans and a work shirt instead of the business clothes he remembered. She was smiling, but a hint of nervousness played around her eyes. "Hello, Mr. Bradley," she said, stepping down from the porch. "Welcome home." Tom stared at her, then at his miraculously transformed property, then back at Rachel, utterly speechless. "What did you do?" he finally managed to ask. "What you did for me," Rachel replied simply. "I saved something important." Before Tom could respond, people began emerging from behind his barn, dozens of them wearing work clothes and carrying tools. Neighbors he recognized, along with strangers who looked like professional contractors. Henry Walsh was there, grinning broadly as if he'd won the lottery. Mary Peterson from down the road carried a toolbox. Even Jim Morrison, with whom Tom hadn't spoken in years, was walking toward him with a wide smile. "Surprise!" someone shouted, and suddenly Tom was surrounded by people he'd known his entire life, their faces beaming. "Your corn came in at 48 bushels per acre," Henry was saying, beaming. "Best yield in the county. New irrigation system is top of the line," another voice added enthusiastically. "Rebuilt your whole equipment shed from the ground up," called out someone else. Tom turned back to Rachel, struggling to piece together the unbelievable puzzle. The safety inspectors, the lockdown, the investigation. "All part of getting you away while we worked," Rachel explained. seeing the confusion in his eyes. "We needed time to coordinate everything without you interfering." "Interfering with what?" Tom asked, still bewildered. Rachel gestured broadly to his transformed farm, a gesture of profound pride and gratitude. "With this. You saved my life, Mr. Bradley. The least I could do was save yours." Tom walked slowly through his property, his gaze sweeping over every detail, trying to catalog the changes. His house had been repainted. The roof looked brand new. His barn, once showing signs of age, was now as solid and fresh as if it had been built yesterday. Equipment shed was now twice the size, boasting modern ventilation and brilliant lighting. "I don't understand," Tom said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion and confusion. "Who are you?" Rachel smiled, and in that moment Tom could suddenly see the 8-year-old girl she had once been. The recognition hitting him like a bolt of lightning. "Rachel Whitmore used to be Rachel Mitchell," she said quietly. "My family farmed the Mitchell place about 10 miles south of here until the drought of 2001 nearly bankrupted us." The Mitchell place. Tom remembered now. The family had been hit devastatingly hard when their wells went dry and corn prices plummeted. They'd been on the verge of losing everything. "You gave my father work that summer," Rachel continued, her voice soft but clear. "Paid him to help with your harvest, even though you could have easily managed with your regular crew. You probably saved our farm." Tom remembered Frank Mitchell, a proud man who had hated asking for help. Tom had, in fact, invented extra work just to give Frank a way to earn money without feeling like he was accepting charity. "You also gave me a summer job," Rachel added. "Remember painting fence posts and helping with irrigation? You paid me way more than the work was worth." The memories flooded back to Tom, a skinny girl with bright pigtails, always asking questions about farming and machinery, curious about everything, especially the business side of things. "I used that money for college," Rachel said, her gaze distant as she recalled the past. "Studied business and computer science and eventually started my own company developing agricultural software. Last year, we went public." Tom stared at her, utterly stunned. "You're the Rachel Whitmore who owns Agritech Solutions?" Rachel nodded, a modest smile touching her lips. Agritech Solutions was one of the biggest agricultural software companies in the country. Tom had read about them in farming magazines, though he'd never been able to afford their cutting-edge products. "When I heard about the Tom Bradley who'd pulled someone out of a flooded ditch," Rachel continued, her eyes meeting his, "I had to make sure it was the same Tom Bradley who'd saved my family's farm 20 years ago. Once I confirmed it was you, I knew I had to find a way to repay the favor." Tom looked around at the dozens of people still diligently working on his property, then back at Rachel. "All this because I gave your father some work? Mr. Bradley, what you did for my family changed the entire course of my life," Rachel stated, her voice sincere and firm. "Without that summer job, I wouldn't have had money for college. Without college, I wouldn't have started my company. Everything I've accomplished traces back to your kindness." Rachel gestured toward his magnificent rebuilt farm. "This isn't charity. It's compound interest on an investment you made 20 years ago." Tom slowly sank onto his tractor's step, the memories suddenly clearer and more vivid than they had been in years. Frank Mitchell, proud and broken. The man wouldn't take a handout, so Tom had meticulously invented extra fence work and paid him double what it was worth. And that skinny little girl, Rachel, always asking questions. How the combine worked, why the soil smelled different after rain. Linda had taken Rachel into the kitchen one afternoon for lemonade and cookies. Later that evening, Linda had said, her voice filled with quiet certainty, "That girl's going to change the world someday, Tom. You mark my words." Tom. Mark my words. And now, here she was. She had indeed changed the world, and then, miraculously, brought a piece of that transformation right back home to him. "Linda," Tom whispered, his eyes stinging with unexpected tears. "You were right about her." Tom walked through his equipment shed, marveling at the gleaming new tools and machinery. Everything was top of the line, the kind of equipment he dreamed about, but never thought he could afford. "The fake safety investigation?" Tom asked, a hint of incredulity still in his voice. "We needed you away while we worked," Rachel explained, her gaze sweeping over the renovated space. "Rebuilding the shed, installing irrigation systems, harvesting your corn. It all required heavy equipment and careful coordination. Plus, we wanted it to be a surprise. And the 30-day timeline? That was simply how long it took to do everything right. We didn't want to rush and give you anything less than perfect." Tom found himself in his kitchen, which had also been completely renovated. New state-of-the-art appliances gleamed, fresh paint covered the walls, and modern fixtures somehow still felt perfectly at home in the familiar space. "The corn harvest?" he asked, still processing the overwhelming generosity. "Brought in every single bushel and sold it at premium prices," Henry Walsh replied, joining them, his face beaming. "Proceeds are in your farm account along with enough to cover your mortgage for the next 2 years. 2 years. Tom felt dizzy at the thought of not worrying about mortgage payments. The crushing weight suddenly lifted. Rachel then handed him a thick folder. Inside were full ownership papers for all the new equipment, warranty information for the extensive renovations, and, astonishingly, the deed to an additional 40 acres adjacent to his property, if you want to expand. Tom opened the folder with shaking hands. The equipment alone was worth more than his entire farm had been. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Because kindness deserves kindness," Rachel replied simply, her eyes gentle. "Because you saw a struggling family and helped without expecting anything in return. Because 20 years later, when I could finally afford to pay it back, I found you still here, still helping people, still being the kind of person who risks everything to save a stranger." That evening, after the last of the workers had gone and the celebratory buzz began to wind down, Tom and Rachel sat on his front porch, watching the sky blaze with the colors of sunset. "I have one more thing," Rachel said, pulling a crisp envelope from her jacket. "A job offer." Tom looked at her, a question in his eyes. "I need someone to head up our new rural development initiative," Rachel explained. "Someone who understands farming, who knows what small agricultural communities truly need, who can bridge the gap between technology and tradition." Tom opened the envelope. The salary figure made him blink twice, then again. "It's mostly consulting work," Rachel continued. "You'd keep farming, but you'd also help us develop software and programs that actually serve rural communities instead of just extracting profit from them." Tom thought about his daughter, Casey, about the conversations they'd had about the future of farming, about whether there was any point in preserving something that seemed to be slowly disappearing. "I'll need to think about it," Tom said finally, a new sense of possibility dawning within him. "Take all the time you need," Rachel replied, her gaze sweeping over the rejuvenated farm. "But Tom, what you built here, this farm, this community, this way of life, it's worth preserving. And with the right support, it can flourish for generations to come. Thrive." 2 months later, Tom stood in his fully restored equipment shed, engrossed in a video call with agricultural software developers, while his young grandson happily played with toy tractors on the pristine, concrete floor. Casey, his daughter, had indeed moved back to Iowa, bringing her expertise in sustainable agriculture to help manage the farm's exciting new expansion. The farm that had once teetered on the brink of collapse was now a vibrant model for rural innovation, seamlessly blending traditional farming wisdom with cutting-edge technology. Tom's fields were producing higher yields with significantly less environmental impact, and his equipment operated with an efficiency he had never dreamed possible. His bank account, healthier than it had been since before Linda's illness, was a welcome relief. Yet the best part wasn't the newfound financial security or the modern conveniences. It was the profound realization that kindness, the simple, spontaneous act of helping someone in desperate need, had ignited a powerful chain reaction that had transformed multiple lives across multiple generations. Rachel's company had dramatically expanded its rural initiative, providing crucial support that allowed dozens of other small farms to modernize and thrive. Even the Mitchell farm, where Rachel had grown up, was now owned by a young, ambitious family who had been able to afford it thanks to the innovative programs Rachel had developed. Tom's rescue of a stranded motorist had seemed like a small, isolated incident at the time, just what any neighbor would do. But like a stone thrown into still water, that single, selfless act had created ripples that spread far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The flood that had threatened to destroy everything he held dear had instead revealed the true power of community, the enduring impact of kindness, and the remarkable way that helping others ultimately comes back to help you in ways you never expect.